Denmark is considering a ban on insulting other countries, cultures, and religions. This has been sparked by a spate of Koran burnings in both Denmark and Sweden. The most recent incident was on Monday, where an Iraqi refugee and his friend burned a Koran outside the Swedish parliament. And Sweden and Denmark have been under a lot of pressure from Islamic countries to essentially crack down on this, and they're caving. Ella, I mean, this idea of banning insulting other countries is just chilling, isn't it?
Well, it's remarkable that it's not, I mean, it would be bad if it was, but that it's not just you can't burn religious texts or, sacred religious texts or, some kind of specific wording about that. Not that it would be okay to do that, but the fact that it's countries, cultures and religions, such a wide scope of, potential for censorship there. I mean, will people be allowed to, boo other countries at football matches? Yeah. I mean, seriously, but, will you be allowed to send up kind of, I don't know, yoga culture? Where does this end? It's incredibly cowardly. In fact, Brendan O'Neill, in his article for Spiked on this, used the word appease. It's, the fact that these countries are being threatened, in particular by Turkey, being threatened to say, we won't allow you to enter NATO, we were going to kind of put all these sort of international blocks on you unless you bring in essentially sort of blasphemy law, hyper blasphemy law, which extends into culture and countries. And they are, instead of standing up for liberal democratic values, for free speech, and, it's quite easy to say it's probably not the nicest or smartest thing in the world to burn someone's holy book. It's not a great political protest. But in our country, you won't go to jail if you do it, or, you can do it because we're a free country. It seems to me like the bare minimum that you would be able to express your political or anti-religious views in that way. And I think it's just telling of the way that, quite a few of countries, particularly in Europe, are going in relation to blasphemy law, particularly when it comes to Islam.
Yeah. Tom, are we just too cowardly when it comes to, when Islam is in the frame, essentially?
Well, I think that deep cowardice has been there for so many decades now. And if you think about, especially the way in which this restriction that Denmark are kind of have tabled and that Sweden have said they're thinking is kind of similar, there's even cowardice in terms of how they pose it. Because again, they present this is about clamping down on speech that upsets other countries, cultures and religions and so on. But I'm pretty sure you could burn the stars and stripes in Sweden or Denmark and not get in too much trouble even after this law has come into place. If they're talking about religion, we know they're not talking about the Mormons. This is so obvious what's going on here. And it's also, as you were saying, Ella, just, are we really suggesting that certain nations, certain religious leaders should have a right to dictate the free speech rights of people in entirely different countries? It's something incredibly outrageous about this. And you would just wish that nations like Denmark and Sweden, first of all, would have the guts to kind of stand up for their own citizens' free speech rights, even if those sometimes are going to be exercised by some genuinely bigoted far-right people. It's also worth pointing out that some of these Koran burnings have been ex-Muslims, people from Muslim-majority countries, people who have left the faith behind and so on. This isn't
people
just
refugees from those countries.
Exactly. This isn't just, again, kind of far-right agitators who are just looking to cause trouble necessarily. And not only did you wish that these countries had the guts to stand up for these rights themselves, but also that there would be a bit more solidarity, that other countries, I mean, if the European Union is supposed to stand up for European values, why is it deadly quiet on this particular issue? And that also that depressing sense that the way in which various different sort of Islamist tyrants effectively have been campaigning on the world stage under the auspices of the Organisation for Islamic Cooperation to effectively introduce worldwide blasphemy restrictions under the idea that it's hate speech to defame gods and prophets and so on, is being depressingly successful. And you just feel like since the Rushdie affair onwards, really, we've just been slowly on this path. And whilst there's been little flare-ups of support for blasphemers, well, there's been little flare-ups of Je suis Charlie when that happened and so on. Yeah, but really, we're always heading in this direction because that fundamental cowardice and inability to stick up for proper liberal Enlightenment values has just eked and sort of eaten itself away, it seems like.
And also, I mean, isn't there a problem with the fact that when we do give into this stuff, aren't we just giving it a further green light? We're sort of validating the idea that it's okay for Muslims to be angry and to shut us down if we want to insult their religion. Every time we give in. We're not actually making the problem go away.
No, and we're also, well, everybody says everything feeds the culture war these days, but there is a sense in which, if you're unable to sort of, like I said, take a step back and say, it doesn't matter, it almost doesn't matter that this act is a stupid thing to do, that what is worse than burning a Quran in front of an embassy or in front of a mosque or anything like that is the idea that you couldn't.
Yeah.
It's the idea that you would be prevented from doing so, because that speaks to much more important, broader, universal values around free speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion even, and the fact that a supposedly civilized modern nation like Sweden or anyone else isn't able to grasp that is worrying. But it's also, when we talk about cowardice, you also kind of want to say, well, do you think that you could go into any of these countries that are, throwing their toys out of the pram basically around this blasphemy law and say what you like about being gay, or say what you like about being a woman, or women are being in some of these nations are being pilloried for showing their hair.
Yeah.
And so there's no give and take even. It's like, we will bend over backwards to not offend you in any way possible, despite the fact that you yourself have some pretty offensive views.
Yeah.
And we're not marching in and saying, not as a democratic nation, we're not marching and saying, as a sovereign nation, you have to do this. And yet we're the ones that have to always acquiesce. And I don't think that says anything about the strength of that kind of sort of extreme religious viewpoint. It speaks more about the weakness of a secular, supposedly freedom-based view in the West.
Yeah.
And it's worth remembering as well, this is, not only do we have a failure here of kind of solidarity with, say, Sweden or Denmark, or at least trying to, support those who would want to make more of a stand for freedom of speech. By giving into this stuff, you're also completely throwing under the bus the targets and the victims of religious bigotry in countries which do criminalise Islamic blasphemy. I mean, the rise of Islamic blasphemy laws in places like Pakistan is bound up with the oppression of religious minorities, often within Islam itself, particularly the Ahmadi community and so on, who are seen as heretics by the majority of Muslims in that particular country. And that's one of the really chilling things about this as well, where if you're talking about Christians, ex-Muslims, members of what are seen as kind of heretical Muslim sects within Islam in Muslim-majority countries, we also throw those people under the bus. We abandon those people when we allow these kind of blasphemy standards, not only to kind of continue uncondemned in other parts of the world, but even to kind of assert themselves over here at the behest of these tyrants and at the the willing participation of very cowardly Western leaders. So it's not just about the West kind of sticking up for itself. These are universal values which defend people the world over. And the more we allow them to be encroached upon, the more people are going to fall victim to that kind of intense intolerance and religious bigotry, which is something that surely anyone should want to take on.